Long lights stretch vision forward. Amber, collegiate banners, a shuffling, half-filled audience. Behind the podium is a slumped, cane-bearing man. He continues, "It fell for a duration of 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks, and 4 days. The location was the Olympic rain shadow region, 50 miles north of Seattle, Washington. Affected locations include Port Angeles and Townsend, Sequim, Coupeville, Victoria, and the San Juan Islands. Though new rain has been reported globally in recent decades, this first incident began in 2019 and took everyone by surprise." Come on now. Although, in a way, no one was surprised. The world was already ending with the pandemic and all. It was a particularly formative event for me. I suppose those of you who haven't seen me up close wouldn't understand the joke. I apologize. Why does it look so off? The phenomena drew remarkably little attention in its time, but with the recent increase in new rain events, a new slide flicks onto the board, then several more. And to dissuade those attempting to pimp it with occult origins, we all know who I am speaking of. I have been asked to help us revisit the topic. Before the technical elements of my talk, I would like to share a story. I think it's important people know what it's like, past the technical, what it's like living under a new rain event. Now, I grew up in Port Townsend, and the following took place between December 3rd and December 16th, the day my father died. You are listening to The New Rain by Nick Satnick, first published in Volume 5, Issue 3 of Coffin Bell magazine on July 1st, 2022. Several revisions have been made since first publication. This horror story contains elements some may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. He was out in the rain too long and came back stretched. Tall, sucked thin like the victim of some alien social media filter. That was how my father came back. I was on the porch keeping watch for him while Mom called the neighbors to ask had they seen him, but then he was home. And so tall he needed to bend 90 at the waist to get under the tarp me and him had strung up over the deck. Bending, Dad looked like one of the waitresses he used to eye at Sirens, the ones Mom would smack him for. I wanted to cry. We didn't let him in the house because he was soaked with rain and we were scared. Just threw a towel at him. He didn't know how to use it, and watched from the window while we waited for the rain to go away. We tried to make it work, really. When it wasn't raining, I took Dad to the park to play football. His new arms worked wonders. If there was a hunger in him, he probably could have passed that ball halfway from Seattle to Los Angeles. Maybe he could try out for the Seahawks next season, I told Mom. People gave us danger looks, but there wasn't a law against keeping folk like Dad around. Not yet. The state was still trying to decide what to do with them, and was too busy with the pandemic to legislate on much else. Everyone had their own theories. Everyone was quick to believe whatever tasted good. News claimed a stretched person's brain showed lower levels of consciousness, docile bliss. We'd learn how wrong this was later, with better scans, but it was a nice idea that kicked the need for legislation down the road a few yards. My then-girlfriend, Sally, said it was a cover-up, climate engineering gone wrong, or, more likely, an attempt to tame a rebellious population about to rise in glorious communist revolt. Sally was just like that. Not that I was much better at that age. Neither of us trusted the news, though. Anyone calling the stretch docile had never lived near them. One time, I saw a homeless stretched. They were all homeless except Dad, I guess. Pluck a cat off the roof of a convenience store. By the nape, then eat it alive. It screamed. I didn't know cats could scream. Dad wasn't like that, though. He just wasn't. There was something left in him. Though, still, I'll admit, I mentioned divorce first. Mom looked at me like I'd been born out of a trash chute. They'd been talking about separating before, but apparently it was off the table now. I guess this was the best thing to happen to their marriage in years. Dinner was awkward that night. Me and Mom and Dad leaning in through the window. All of us were quiet except for Dad's occasional gargling and the chink of silverware on porcelain, but I was really relieved. The thought of Dad living on the street like the cat eater had been churning in me since he'd come back. Though, I'm not sure we could have got rid of him at all. Whenever it started raining, he would scamper under the tarp. He always came right back home. Most stretched people didn't mind the rain. I hoped that Dad's aversion meant there was something in him that hadn't been pulled thin. Something he was keeping dry for us. We tried playing Scrabble. His long fingers struggled on even one of the little white and black tiles. Quivering, grimacing, with a long mouth, he spelled Shazam, eviscerate, beef. The next day, Mom called a therapist to rehabilitate him. They must have laughed at her because she started yelling at the phone. He couldn't walk inside, had to crawl like a stick bug, would tangle up in doorways, and I'd pull him out one limited time, quickly, before he broke free by force. He struggled outside as well, walked like a child on stilts. I made him a cane from a section of our rain gutter that had broken off. I ground the sharp edges with a file, patted the foot with a tennis ball, and even painted it a nice matte black. Finished the job, Dad had always said. He liked it, not that he could say so, with his vocal cords stretched out. It was odd, I thought, how his insides had been stretched just the same as his outsides, even though the rain hadn't gotten inside him at all. What would happen, I wondered, if the water went inside first, like if you drank it? I spent a lot of time thinking about stuff like that in the shower. I pulled out a mostly full plastic bottle and carefully unwrapped the layer of duct tape that was covering the cap. There was a small hole in the cap's center, which I had made with a nail and a hammer. We were up at Fort Worden, by the ruined gun batteries. It was all concrete end placements, unmanned for years, never actually used, but still, they had been made for war. The sun was red in the face, slinking away to her horizon. I tightened my grip on the bottle, and a jet of dark rainwater splattered onto the grass. It was oily. Want a drink? I asked, pointing the bottle towards the men who were heckling us. Crazy kid, put that down, one ordered, but I took a step forward and they ran. One slipped and fell, getting a face of damp grass, but he got up and kept going. New rain lost its potency after a little time on the ground. Kept pretty well in a plastic bottle, though. Dad watched them go, then few strides and stooped. His long fingers came back up, holding the football we'd been tossing. He turned to me, and made as if to throw it, but I waved him down. When I was younger, I ditched school a lot. And when Dad was out of a job, he'd find me. We'd play catch, then he'd send me back to school. But that was a long time ago. Now it was getting dark. My arms ached from throwing ball for what must have been hours. It was all he ever wanted to do. He threw the ball at me. I jerked, slapped it out of the air. "Where are you?" I think I'd meant to say, "What's wrong with you?" but that would have been a cruelly rhetorical question. Dad gargled in response. I just picked up the ball and walked. A week and a half had passed. Mom must have decided he wasn't going to come back because she was busy moving on, and I was in charge of keeping Dad out of the house. I just wish she wouldn't use our house to do it. Dad walked beside me at full height with his cane tapping the sidewalk. A handle had formed near the top from where his grip deformed the metal. His fingers were long enough to wrap around several times, overlapping themselves. He held it gingerly, though. It got dark, and Mom hadn't texted to come back, so we took the long walk down Cherry to Lawrence and then Water Street, where the ferry and nice shops were, but it didn't feel right to loiter in the area with Dad. So I took us back into the residential streets, and that was about how long it took for me to calm down. I talked now, and he gargled back. We carried on like that for a little while. At one point, I must have said something pretty funny because he leaned down on the cane and grinned at me. Looked me in the eyes. We were bathing in this yellow light coming out of someone's dining room window. My father's eyes were shining, vertical ovals. They couldn't rotate up or down in the socket because they'd been stretched too tall, so they just spun from side to side like cylinders. His teeth were long, thin, pointy at the end, cave spires in a dark mouth. But he was smiling. And there was my father. I said something stupid like, "Hey, Dad, listen." I don't really remember because then a drop of rain fell from the sky. It missed me and exploded on the sidewalk. Where had been the weather siren? It started howling now. New rain didn't work by old rain's rules. It came the same each time. First like molasses, slow-wrung ink from a cloth, then it would speed up to a full downpour. Really, it was crazy we went outside at all, considering even a few drops on the skin could turn you into a human Picasso painting. People get used to the craziest things. My coat, boots, and pants were all waterproof, so I would probably be safe until it started really coming down. I put my hood up, pulled on a pair of disposable latex gloves from my pocket, and tucked the ends of my sleeves into the rubber. Then I started toward the house beside us to ask for shelter in their garage, though not further, because of the pandemic, of course. I'd done it before. I would be fine. Then, Dad straightened and ran. My mind caught up too late. I had to find a place to hide from the rain, but Dad, reliable as always, was about to run home, and if he made it home, he would find Mom vigorously moving on with the latest version of Paul from accounting. I lunged, trying to catch hold of my father's hand, waist, leg, his long toes, fucking anything. But my fingers and face scraped against sidewalk-only blood, came out of my cheek. I was upright, only in time to hear another drop, strike pavement, and see my father loping homewards. He was a silent runner, more steady on his feet after a week of practice, swerving around obstacles like the largest alley cat I had ever seen, still carrying the cane. Then he turned, stepped easily over someone's backyard fence, and was gone. I'd be caught in the rain if I raced my father home, and I would still arrive after him. Part of me wanted to leave it. I already lost, really. How would he react? Another drop. What would it be like to hide with the family next to me, slink home after, see the aftermath, the fallout, the nuke bomb crater, or whatever else I would return into? Or maybe Dad wouldn't care who Mom was bringing home, or what she was doing with them. Maybe. But then I remembered how he'd smiled, how sharp his teeth looked, and how human his eyes had seemed, rotoring side to side like vases on turntables, watching everything. I ran. Cold drops struck all over me, and rain splashed up from quick-formed puddles as the sky poured itself out. The oily liquid sought an orifice in my clothing, but didn't find one yet. My coat and rain pants were sopping by the time I crossed the threshold. Scrabbling crashes and quick cries shook our house. I skidded past the kitchen and into the living room. My father had folded himself into the hallway, rain gutter in hand but forgotten. I could hear two voices coming from the master bedroom. My mother screaming, and a man shouting. Dad pounded his body against their door, gargling in sick rage. I went over, grabbed his arm, started pulling him away. He looked down, paused, and fuck off! Came another door-muffled shout. A leg whipped out. It caught me in the gut, and I tumbled down the hall. I was still gasping when Dad grabbed up that old piece of rain gutter I'd given him, flicked the padding tennis ball off its end, almost with contempt, and, with the strength of a man who could have passed a football halfway from Seattle to Los Angeles, he plunged it through the door. The door was peeled off its hinges like an old scab. It fell into the hall, landing at an angle against the far wall. The large, hairy body of a red-headed man was stuck to the back, half-clothed and jerking slightly, a metal rod sprouting from his chest. Dad made to crawl through the doorway, but twisted back, a can of pepper spray hissing into his face. I was up, grabbed him again, this time by the hand. His burned gaze spun at me, and I made a decision. I got my other hand on his as well, one around his knuckles, the other just past the first joint. Then I broke his fingers. He chased me through the living room and into the kitchen. Paintings tore off walls, rugs were shredded and scampered out of position, the armchair upended. But there were knives in the kitchen. Metal flashed and gangly limbs recoiled, bleeding. Red covered my black raincoat and blue gloves. I hurled a plate across the room and it shattered on the far wall, sending a cascade of teacups off a shelf. I threw another plate, which caught him in the face. While he was dazed, I ducked behind the counter island. Pepper-burned eyes whirred in vertical sockets, watching everything through a red haze. Long legs and elbows scraped against the tile floor. Long fingers brushed the low ceiling. deep breath grew closer. I still had a knife. I sprang and stabbed, and then stabbed and stabbed, and metal struck against bone, and we were grunting, squealing things. One of his finger bones, exposed from where I broke them, punctured my pant leg and tore a long cut. But then, cut, cut, cut! And nothing was moving. Except for me. The next day, I shifted in my chair, rearranging limbs. Rain had gotten in where my father's bone cut me. It had slicked off my pant leg and into the wound. My right leg splayed under the desk now, my knee jammed against the wall, and my shin stretched back out under the chair. It worked fine, other than being twice as long as my left. I'd started walking by tying my ankle to the back of my belt and then hobbling on my twisted knee and normal foot with a broom for support. It worked, and as a method I've continued to this day with the addition of a knee pad and a cane. The night after the fight, after waiting out the rain, I'd crawled outside and rolled around in the dirt till my tainted rain gear lost its potency. Mom hadn't done much more other than to call the police. She died last year, never remarried. There was a window on the other side of the desk and a laptop on its surface, but I wasn't looking at either of them. There was a plastic bottle in front of me. It had a hole in the cap and was filled with dark, oily rain. I just looked at the thing, held it in my hand. It was heavier than the knife I'd used the night before, though not by much. I wondered what would happen. Docile bliss? That's what they said on the news, though Sally and I didn't believe it. I was out in the rain again, watching my father run, unable to stay, terrified to go. Finish the job. Dad always said, finish the job. I lifted the bottle. I looked from every angle. This way and that in the light. Thinking slowly. The lecture, which followed his anecdote, had been long and technical, and was capped off by a rapid Q&A, which was now almost over. "But you didn't drink it, obviously," asked an audience member after a mic was passed back to her. "I think we should wrap up here, actually," the presenter said, tapping his papers into order. "Just that one question, if you please, Dr. Karanaki. You said you'd allow one more," the moderator drawled in a voice that could have been mistaken for boredom. The man at the podium only smiled, his lips pursed shut, and agreed. Obviously.